ॐ ब्रह्मानन्दं परमसुखदं केवलं ज्ञानमूर्तिं द्वन्द्वातीतं गगनसदृशं तत्त्वमस्यादिलक्ष्यम् एकं नित्यं विमलमचलं सर्वधी साक्षिभूतं भावातीतं त्रिगुणरहितं सद्गुरुं तं नमामि। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
Be thou my refuge, O Master Shankara. I do not understand correctly even a single branch of knowledge. I do not possess even the least bit of wealth. O teacher, quickly bestow on me thy grace. Be thou my refuge, O Master Shankara. शास्त्र सुधा जलधे महिषोपनिषत् कथितार्थनिधे हृदये कलये नलं चरणं भव शङ्कर देशिकमे शरणं करुणाकरुणादरपालय मा भवसागर दुःखविदूरहितं रचयाखिल दर्शनतत्त्वविदं भव शङ्कर देशिक मे शरणं भवता जनता सुविता भविता निजबोधविचारण चारुमते कलयेश्वर जीवविवेकविदं विदितानमया विशदैककला न चञ्चलकाञ्चनमस्ति गुरो धृतमेव विदेहि कृपां सहजां भव शङ्करदेशिकमे शरणं विदितानमया विशदैककला न चञ्चलकाञ्चनमस्ति गुरो धृतमेव विदेहि कृपां सहजां भव शङ्करदेशिकमे शरणं भव शङ्करदेशिकमे शरणं भव शङ्करदेशिकमे शरणम्.
I'm reading from the book Viveka Chudamani. The chapter is Shankaracharya, his life and work. This is written by Swami Ranganathananda ji. We find clearly from a study of Shankara's career that his purpose was to reduce to unity and harmony under the hegemony of Vedanta the multiplicity of conflicting thought systems without destroying the integrity of the prevailing faiths. He could have brought everything to a dead, dull level of uniformity, but he did not do that, for it militated against his idea of the richness of diversity in the world of faiths. Unity was his aim, unity in diversity and not uniformity. Diversity connotes richness, but when diversity destroys the central unifying cord, it becomes chaotic and an enemy of all progress and well-being of a community. Therefore, the purpose of all the great thinkers in this country has been and is to preserve the variety and to subordinate it to an overriding unity. The operation of this idea has created harmony out of all the diverse thoughts and faiths in this land, instead of reducing everything to a single uniform faith at the point of the sword, as has happened in some other countries. It's a federation of faiths that Shankara established through a struggle based on reason and free discussion, designed to appeal to the heart and mind of the people. As such, he fully deserved the title of the teacher who harmonized the 6 systems of faith. Sanmata Stapana Acharya, conferred on him by a grateful people. This is what we get out of the work of Shankara. There were myriads of faiths justifying themselves through appeals to varying shades of logic and revelation. But there was no loyalty to a fundamental principle, which could be considered to be a mediating element between sect and party and party. Shankara tried to introduce a mediating element between these, and he found it in the great philosophy of Vedanta, which proclaimed as ultimate reality a principle that is personal as well as impersonal, immanent as well as transcendent in its reality.
Now let's have a short period of meditation. Good morning. Let me just make sure. I always like to see the time when I'm talking because they have a tendency to go overboard. So Swamiji is in Alberta, I believe, and he'll be back in a few days. Today the topic is Shankaracharya. It's always I would say, a spiritual treat to have to think about, to reflect on and discuss the life and teachings of great souls, because it gives us an opportunity, in case we didn't have it at other times, to reflect on them and to hold the thought of their life and teachings in our mind, and thereby purify and uplift our own mind. The Shankaracharya, you notice the title Acharya. Acharya means the teacher. And Shankaracharya as a teacher is a different category than Avatara. We speak of incarnations of God, Ramakrishna or Buddha or Krishna, but Shankaracharya we speak of as a great teacher. And in trying to understand his life and teachings, I would say keep in mind Swami Vivekananda. Vivekananda also I would classify as an Acharya. We just heard the introduction to Vivek Chudamani written by Swami Ranganathananda, and that's a very interesting short piece to read if you want to get a synopsis about Shankaracharya. But anyway, I quote the one thing that he said about him. He's one of the boldest thinkers and one of the most profoundest philosophers. No study of Indian spiritual or philosophical thought could be taken seriously if we don't discuss Shankaracharya. So through his writings, his debates, his social interactions, Shankara was certainly a very great teacher. So also Nehru in, I think, Glimpses of World History calls him a curious mixture of a philosopher and a scholar, an agnostic and a mystic, poet and saint, a practical reformer and an able organizer. Seem to have been very, very multi-talented. Also that the impact of Shankara, as we know today, is largely through the system of philosophy that he established and his commentaries on the great works. Now, what's unusual is, if you want to move millions or hundreds of millions of people, it's usually not possible through an appeal to the intellect. It's usually on some emotional level. And yet Shankara did move the vast mass of the Indian population towards away from the prevalent thought, away from the confusion that we just heard described in Swami Ranganathan's introduction, towards his view of philosophy of Vedanta as rooted in Advaita. So that's also pretty unusual to be able to do that. Unfortunately, as with many of the figures in Indian history, the account of his life is not very accurate or complete, so we don't have a lot of information about it. What we do have is usually clothed in myth or perhaps exaggeration. Even his birth date is not completely clear, and that's surprising because he's relatively recent in terms of thinkers of the world. But it's roughly around 800 AD. His life, as I said, is covered in myth and exaggeration. For example, they say that he mastered all of the Vedas at a young age, at the age of 8. So firstly, we do know that his life was quite short. He only lived 32 years. And so it's amazing that one person could have accomplished that much in just 32 years. But they say that he knew the Vedas at a young age, in fact at age 8. Is it possible? I don't know. But on the one hand, it sounds fantastic. On the other hand, we can't totally rule it out either, given that we saw in the life of Swami Vivekananda that it's possible to have amazing mastery at a young age and also an amazing memory. You know, in Swami Vivekananda's life that he would be able to remember what he heard just once. And so even in school, when his teacher thought he wasn't paying attention, he actually was, and he was able to repeat everything verbatim. So you can take it as seriously as you want, but anyway, he clearly knew the Vedas at a young age. He wrote extensively on what are called the Prasthanatraya. So in Indian philosophy, there are 3 works that you have to master before you can be called a philosopher, and before you can be said to have established a school of thought. you must state out your position on these three. One is the Gita, the other is Upanishads, and the third is Brahma Sutras. So until one explains from your point of view, until you explain those three and defend it with others, you are not counted as a philosopher or a teacher. And certainly he did masterful commentaries on all these three. But in addition to sitting in one place and writing these scholarly treatises, he also moved throughout the Indian subcontinent. He walked the length and breadth of India several times and interacted with communities and leaders. And it is this part that Nehru is referring to when he says he was a practical reformer and able organizer. Vivekananda also refers to it in his lectures from Colombo to Almora, when he says that India was never in need, or never wanting in terms of reformers and social organizers. So he walked around India many times. He tried to reform the religious practices that he encountered. He rebuilt and resurrected many temples, schools, but most importantly, he tried to bring unity amongst attitudes. The prevalent attitudes were very diverse. In addition, as you know, he established 4 monasteries at the corners of the subcontinent: Badrinath, Puri, Dwarka, and Sringeri, and also 10 monastic orders. So he brought some order into Indian spiritual thought. Now, he wasn't the first to do this, in fact, because this kind of organization is not Vedic. The Vedic idea is that you pursue your own spiritual life. If you are a monk, then you may establish an ashrama where you teach people. Everybody is free to come and stay there and learn. But the idea of a monastery and institutionalized monasticism is not Vedic. It's actually started with Buddha. So Shankara inherited then a land in which this Buddhist monastic tradition was established, and so he had to do something with it. What he did is he converted it into an Indian, more Vedantic kind of tradition. In fact, it is said that he also converted a lot of Buddhist temples into Indian temples. Here's another interesting thing, that the concept of temple is also not Vedic. Vedic idea of public worship is a yagnam, the yagnasala and the homa, but the temple is not a Vedic concept. And that, some people speculate, also started with the Buddhists, and that many of the temples that we know of today were actually Buddhist, and that they were reconverted to other deities later on, partly by Shankara. But be that as it may, one thing is stands out in this, that by making this actual work of moving around India, the Indian subcontinent, to the different places and establishing these orders, he brought about a certain unity in the subcontinent. Now, Swami Vivekananda has often said that the unity of India is not so much based on politics or political, but it's based on spirituality. Culturally, it's very diverse. Politically, as a country, it's just born yesterday. It's quite young. And you saw that in the reading that at the time between Buddha and Shankara, immediately soon after Buddha, there were a lot of strong kings, such as Harshavardhana, and then there was a strong empire. But much later, there was no strong leadership, political leadership, and so there were a lot of smaller communities, principalities, and so on. So politically, it is divided, but spiritually, Shankara established a unity, and therefore, based on Vedic thought and ancient thought, and so emphasized and proved again that the unity of India, the Indian subcontinent, is based on spirituality. Swami Vivekananda, as I said, emphasized this many times, that the raison d'etre for India is spirituality and the communication of spirituality. So indeed, it probably had to be this way. There's a statement in some places when you read about what are the signs of a nation or a developed country, and it is said that one of these is the sense of nationhood, the sense that we are a nation. And in this sense, in a spiritual sense, India, the Indian subcontinent, had it from ancient times. Now, the times that he lived in, as I said, there was always in India encouragement for plurality of views on spiritual life. Swami Vivekananda says that it is only in the context of such freedom that progress and growth can take place. On the other hand, there has to be a limit to this as well, otherwise we will descend into chaos. Similarly, on the political front also. So Shankara brought philosophical unity by connecting all these strands under the banner of Vedanta. It's also interesting that if you think of the cultural strength of the subcontinent, that a lot of the disagreements and the way that Shankara brought people around to his way of thinking were through debates, through intellectual discourse. Now think of the culture, how culturally advanced a society has to be convinced through intellectual or rational discourse. It's usually not done like that. It's usually through some not as idealistic means, often descending into chaos or violence of some kind. So it speaks something, whatever disunity there might have been, still it speaks to some deeply held cultural strength that Shankara was able to operate in that framework. Now, as I said, because we know so little about his life, it's better to focus on his teachings and what he contributed to Indian spiritual thought. So, of course, the prevalent view of the day were largely influenced by Buddha and Buddhism. So maybe we should start by trying to figure out where he agreed with Buddha and where he separated, where he had a different view. So first thing is, on the whole, he did agree with Buddha, so much so that his critics called him a hidden Buddha, Prachana Buddha. But where he differed for sure are the following. Firstly, about the authority of the Vedas. Now, Buddha, for various reasons, did not want to give authority to any book, simply because it will weaken the ability of an individual to think for themselves. Now, Shankara certainly wanted people to think for themselves, but nevertheless he rooted his philosophy on the authority of the Vedas. So he simply accepted that. The second, and maybe more important for us, is about the existence of the Atma. So in question that's being asked is whether there is something which is the soul or the spirit of an individual, an unchanging substratum in this changing world. Buddha, when he was asked, is there something behind the body and mind, which is the essence of a person, he was silent. Silent because Buddha's mastermind in terms of sticking to, you figure it out. What's the point of my proclaiming this or that? You observe, think, reflect, be alert, be mindful, and come to discover whatever truth there is for yourself. So he was simply silent. Well, that caused all people to speculate in different ways on what he actually meant. But there's one thing he said in the Dhammapada that actually seems to point in the direction of the non-existence of the Atma. He said, he equated anatta with nirvana. So, in the Buddhist terminology, the highest state is nirvana. And there is a verse in the Dhammapada that says anatta is nirvana. The question is, what does anatta mean? So this word atta, the Buddhists have interpreted as the Pali version of Atma. And therefore this statement means that there is no Atma. That the lack of Atma, anatta, is the state of nirvana. But we in Vedanta interpret it in a different way. We don't take the word to mean Atma. We take it in this context to mean ego. And so the absence of ego is nirvana. So that's an ongoing discussion between Buddhists and Vedantists. Followers of Buddha, there were some followers of Buddha. You have to remember, between Shankara and Buddha, there was more than 1,000 years. Buddha is about 600 BC, and Shankara is about 800 AD. So there's more than 1,000 years. So in course of time, Buddhist thought underwent a lot of change. And there were followers of Buddha who were nihilists, who said there is no ultimate reality, nothing exists beyond. They're not materialists, but they're nihilists. In particular, they claimed that there is nothing no unchanging spiritual substratum underlying the phenomenal world. And their strongest argument that they made in support of this is there is no way to tell. All that you can observe is the phenomenal. All you can see or think about is the changing. And therefore, what right do you have to assert the existence of something that cannot be perceived? It's interesting, by the way, Ramanujacharya took the same argument later on. He came after Shankara, but he used the same argument. The Buddhist arguments are worth studying, by the way. So in any case, it cannot be observed, so their argument was that it cannot exist. Now Shankara refuted that by arguing as follows, that you cannot observe change unless there is an unchanging background. He gave the example, not exactly this example because these things didn't exist at that time, but if you're watching a movie, you need a screen, an unchanging screen on which the changing scenes are seen. So his argument was that change can only be perceived with an unchanging background, and therefore that there had to be something unchanging. Now, he didn't claim that this is a proof. Shankara is, after all, his logic is impeccable. He didn't claim this is a proof. He didn't claim that you can prove the existence of Brahman by this method or Atman. He simply was making an inference that it is plausible that there is something unchanging. But moreover, Vedanta goes further and says that in fact it's not the case that it's just a speculation, but in fact that it can be experienced. Nevertheless, they also say that the changing and the unchanging can't be experienced simultaneously. This is the well-known example that Shankara gave of the snake and the rope. When you see a rope and you mistake it for a snake, at the moment that you have that illusion, the snake exists. Once you realize that, the snake disappears. And you see the rope as it is. At no time do the snake and the rope coexist. On the other hand, in a sense, they do coexist because on the substratum of the real, the illusion is being projected. So it's a strange situation of existence and non-existence. This is such an important point in the Vedanta philosophy that a special name is given to you. We discussed it before. It's called Maya. Maya is this strange coexistence of contradictions. How is possible that the unchanging and the changing can apparently be coexistent at the same time, but not really. This is different. The Vedantic concept of Maya is different from the Buddhist concept of Mara. You see, when we speak about Maya, often people think of illusion, something which is a distraction, confusion, and so on. The Buddhist idea of Mara is very clearly in that realm. But the Vedanta concept of Maya is a statement of this empirical reality that apparently there is a coexistence of the changing and the unchanging. Another point that Buddha and Shankara disagreed with Buddha on is about fitness of the aspirant. So, as you know, Buddha was very inclusive. He would say anybody can join his organization, and he gave monasticism to monastic robes to many people. Shankara clearly said that's not the case, that you need fitness. Are you fit to be a monk? Are you fit to study? So that's why you see a lot of his work start with qualifications. If you read Atma Bodha or any of his original works, he starts out with who is fit to study this, and he lists certain qualities of head and heart that are needed before the study of this will be fruitful. Nowadays, teachers will explain, no, he's not excluding. Anybody can read it, but if you have these qualities, it will be more fruitful. But in terms of what he's actually saying, is yes, exactly that. But in those days, books were not a plenty, and so to study means you have to study with a teacher. And so he would ask very clearly, what is the fitness of this person to have the study? Those are the main points in which Shankara and Buddha disagreed. Now let's come to some of his main works. Here, I don't they're overwhelming if you try to start analyzing his works. So let's see, we have a little bit of time. We have about 20 minutes, so let's look at this. Let's start with Viveka Chudamani. So, of course, in addition to his commentaries on existing works like Gita and Upanishad and Brahma Sutras, he had some original works, original compositions. I think maybe, in my opinion, you may have different opinion, greatest amongst these is his commentary, his book Viveka Chudamani. As you know, Viveka means discernment. Discernment. Unfortunately, there's a tendency in English to translate it as discrimination. Discrimination is not the same as discernment. Discernment means to know the difference, to discern. This is different from that. Because the phenomena, as we experience them, either in terms of sensory experience or intellectual experience, usually things get mixed up. Many different things are mixed up. And we want to, when you look carefully at something, whether you're looking at it as a scientist or a philosopher or a spiritual aspirant, you have to separate out. To understand the phenomena, you have to separate out the strands. Similarly, to understand an idea, you have to think it through and separate out all the strands that are contributing to that idea. So that's discernment. And the difference between discernment and discrimination is discernment plus a value judgment. I have now figured out this, what I'm observing, this complex phenomena is composed of these many different strands. Now I'm going to express a preference for these strands and this way of putting it together. That is discrimination. You say you have discriminating taste. What does it mean? You made a choice. You thought through the different possibilities and you made a choice. So discrimination involves a value judgment. Now, from the point of view of Raj Yoga, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which came much later, we talk about silencing the mind, and we often think that means that to silence the thoughts that arise in the mind. But there's a harder function of the mind, the antakarna, that needs to be silenced. It's harder to silence because it's really deeply ingrained in our moment-to-moment functioning. And that is the tendency of judgment, the activity of the buddhi, the tendency to infer, to reason, and to come to a conclusion. So that's a different, important distinction to make. Viveka means discernment. So here we are a strange combination of the finite and the infinite, the changing and the unchanging. We want to apply this Viveka. Yes, you can apply it to study natural phenomena, but the greatest study is to apply it to ourselves, to try to separate all of these different strands in our own being. It's an open secret. The nature of ultimate reality and the nature of spiritual reality of the being is an open secret, but we need a trained eye to observe it. Sometimes I give this example of the doctor. You and I can see something and we think we don't understand what's behind it. Maybe we know there's a problem, but the doctor will see the same thing and immediately realize what's the cause of this. Why? One is observing it with a trained mind or a trained eye, and the other is not. So that training is possible through Viveka. We have to observe a lot and then we learn. Now the title of this book, Viveka Chudamani, at once tells us the value and the importance of exercising Viveka and Buddhi. So what will we use this reasoning for? As I just said, you can use it to discover the secrets of the universe. You can use it to discuss philosophy and music and art or any other human endeavor, and all of that is fine. But if you abstract all of these activities, the jewel that we have on our head is the ability to exercise Viveka. So in some sense, that's why he calls it the crest jewel of discernment, Viveka Chudamani. We can use this jewel to grow from the human to the divine. Now in this, there's about 580 verses, I think, in Viveka Chudamani. Very beautiful composition. I'll point out just 3 or 4 verses which are very famous. You know them all, but they're worth pointing out. So verse 3 says this, there are 3 things that are rare: human birth, desire for freedom, and the company of great souls. So he says that the first thing is that when we think about the spiritual journey we are embarking on, remember to be thankful about a few things that you have already. Firstly, the fact that we're human beings, and also in a condition where we have the luxury and the freedom to ask deep questions about who we are and what is the nature of reality. And even amongst humans, many may not even have an idea that it's possible to seek for freedom. In fact, they may not even realize that they're bound. Sri Ramakrishna gives the story of some of the fish that are caught in a net, and some fish bury their nose more deeply in the mud, thinking they're quite safe. We don't even realize we are bound. So to realize that, and realize that maybe there's a higher state of being, that desire for freedom, it's not to be taken lightly. If you have that in you, it's not to be taken lightly. And thirdly, the company of great souls. Because, you see, nobody grows in isolation. Nobody just drops from heaven completely knowing everything. Even Sri Ramakrishna had teachers. You may argue that the teachers merely brought out what was within. That could be, but we all need teachers. And so the third is, now I have the desire for freedom. Who's going to guide me? Who's going to help me? So the company of great souls is also a great blessing. So at the very beginning, he gives this very hopeful, important verse. Don't underestimate what you've already been given. These are very important things. Then in verse 6, he says, Atmaikya bodhena vinapi muktihi nasijyate brahma shatantarapi. So here is a theme that he's going to pound on us, practically every verse in the Vivekachudamani. To know your identity with the spiritual ground is the only path to freedom. And without it, you're not going to succeed even in 1,000 years of Brahma. Brahma is supposed to have a very long year. So this is the idea. Unless you know your identity with the spiritual ground, your identity, the word is aikya, that is equality with that spiritual ground, there is no chance for freedom. And then verse 43, which I like very much for its kind of poetic way of saying something. Ma bhaishta vidwan. So you remember the opening of Vivekachudamani, there's a student who comes to talk to Shankara, the teacher. And he asks him various questions about what is the path to freedom. And this verse I like very much. Ma bhaishta vidwan stavanastya payaha samsara sindhos taranestyupayaha yenaiva yata yatayosya param tameva margam tava nirdishami. So there's both deep thought and also poetic beauty in the way he said it. So he says, he calls the student a Vidwan already. Vidwan is a person who's learned. That means the very fact that you came to a point of asking the question, is there something beyond, makes you a learned person. That's a very, very positive and encouraging statement. And he says, don't be afraid. You are not headed towards ruin. There is a way of going beyond this world of change. The path that the great souls have taken in the path, that very same path I will teach you. So it's a very, very beautiful verse that is very encouraging. Then there's another verse. You see, unfortunately, if we start down this road, we will have a lot of verses to talk about. So let me just maybe mention one or two more. This is verse 31. He says, in English it is like this: among things conducive to moksha, the theme is always moksha. Among things conducive to moksha, devotion is supreme. You first take a little bit of that. Shankara is saying that devotion is supreme, but then he recovers. Seeking one's real nature is devotion. So he's going to define devotion. But the point is, look, there is a very deep point here that the emotional aspect, the emotional attachment to the goal you're trying to reach is a powerful force. Whether you place the goal of that emotional attachment outside yourself or inside yourself, you cannot deny it. Very powerful force. So he's saying, as Swami Vivekananda said many centuries later, you have a powerful force within you. Why don't you find a way to use it to direct yourself to the spiritual goal? So whether you place it outside or inside, it is a powerful force that you can use. But here he says, trying to seek one's real nature is devotion. And as I said, there's many more things one can say about Vivekananda, but maybe we should go on. Let's talk a little bit about Atma Bodha, also one of his original compositions. Now, Atma Bodha is somewhat easier to read, you might say, if you want a first book of his to read, because it's shorter. It's only about 60 or so verses. Sometimes we're a little bit restless or impatient, so we want shorter works and go through them. So Atma Bodha is a good one to start. But there again, he says, knowledge is the direct means of realization, as light is the direct means of eliminating darkness. Okay, makes sense, right? Knowledge is the direct means of realization, as light is the direct means of eliminating darkness. But then he goes on. Therefore, karma cannot remove ignorance. So his idea is that action, karma and even karma yoga, will help to purify your mind. And with that pure mind, now you're fit for meditation. You're fit for study. You're fit for reflection. And that knowledge then will be the direct means of your realization. This is a prevailing view, and I think dominant view for centuries after Shankara, even into our times almost. But as you well know, Vivekananda gave it a different twist. So what he said is that what Shankara said is technically correct. Karma, that is the action itself, is not the cause of removal of the ignorance. But the point is, knowledge and removal of ignorance may occur simultaneously. And so from our point of view, the purification of mind that occurs through unselfish activity or detached performance of work, that purity of mind will immediately reveal the light within. And so the intermediate stage of now you're fit for study may not be relevant. This is certainly the point of view of Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna. So Swami Vivekananda's special emphasis on service as a spiritual path and the worship of God in man speaks to this point. And in illustrating this, of course, he gave you some examples from the Mahabharata, like the Dharma Vyasa, the butcher who attained high states of knowledge and insight through an unselfish performance of his work. And he also quotes the Gita. As I told you, in the Gita, there's only one verse that says that by work alone one can attain the highest goal. By Swami Vivekananda singling this out and commenting on it, it is a major contribution to spiritual thought. So the Karma Yoga is his original work. Original in the sense that if you look at what Swami Vivekananda said about every other yoga, it is a commentary on another work. Whether it's Bhakti Yoga is a commentary on Narada Bhakti Sutras, Raj Yoga is a commentary on Patanjali Yoga Sutras, and Gnana Yoga is a commentary on the Upanishads. But Karma Yoga is in a sense his original work and represents a major innovation in spiritual thought. Now I should say that in why Shankara took this point of view is that he lived at a time when, besides Buddhists, he was also debating another group of people. They were Vedic, but they felt that the importance of rituals was paramount. So it's, in some sense, it was like an older version of Arya Samaj. Swami Dayananda. If you look at the parallels between Shankara's life and Vivekananda's life, Shankara's having to deal with Kumarila Bhatta is similar to the influence that Dayananda had at the time of Vivekananda. So in this sense, probably perhaps to deal with that issue, Shankara couldn't afford really to concede any role for karma, and therefore he put it like that. In the Isha Upanishad, if you look at the first two verses, Shankara's point of view exactly falls into this paradigm. So the second verse says, only by doing work should one desire to live 100 years. Okay, that's the second verse. Kurvan neveha karmani jivishet shatam shamaha. Evam tvayi nanyatetosti na karma lipyate nare. Only by, in this way, will karma not taint you. This is the Isha Upanishad verse 2. And Shankara's commentary on this is, this verse is for householders. This is what he said. This verse is for householders. Verse 1 of the Isha Upanishad, that says, Isha Vashyam Idam Sarvam, is for monks. So when you read Shankara's interpretations of things, keep in mind the social context that he had to work in and why he had to express it like that. Now, of course, we see it in a different way. We have a different interpretation of this, thanks to Swami Vivekananda. Then beyond his other works of this kind, Vivek Chudamani, Atma Bodha, there are his hymns, many hymns. We heard one today. Bhaja Govindam is another hymn, which is a very beautiful one. A very simple meter. Words are simple, and you can learn it very easily, but they're very powerful and practical ideas. I think this is a good hymn to learn in your childhood, because it is difficult to understand in your childhood, but it will be like a seed planted in your mind, and as you grow up, that seed will grow, and you will understand the truth of what is being said. I like one verse especially from the Bhaja Govindam, which I will recite. Satsangasthvam nissangatve, nissangatvam nirmohatve, nirmohatvam nischalatatvam, nischalatatvam jivan mukti. So that's a really, really beautiful verse. You see, here it says, by holy company, by good company, company of devotees, company of good people, what happens is one cultivates detachment. In a very natural way. You know that. You keep the company of holy people without you realizing it. Attachment to petty things becomes weaker, and slowly, if you keep more and more company, that detachment becomes deeper and deeper. Satsangastam nissangatve, nissangatvam nirmohatve. Moham is confusion. Confusion. You see, when are we confused? When we are attached to something, when we don't allow ourselves to take a step back and look at things properly in a detached way, then we tend to jump to a wrong conclusion. So confusion and attachment are connected. So what he's saying is, once you've developed a little bit of detachment because of good company, you start also, the confusion starts going away. Once the mind gets clearer and there's not so much confusion, mind becomes calm. It becomes calm. And from calm mind is the path to Jivan Mukti, that is, to be free while living. I think it's really beautiful because it starts from something very, very concrete and takes you to the highest ideal. One interesting comment I've sometimes speculated on is when he says Bhaja Govindam, who is Govindam? Because it's very unusual for him to use that there. And also, by the way, it is in the accounts of it, it is apparently somebody was reciting a grammar rule and he is trying to tell them. The Mudha is a very strong word to use, and if you just meet somebody on the road and you call them Mudha, it's kind of strong. So I would rather say that probably it's a reflection of hearing and seeing this and reflecting on this, sort of almost talking to himself in a way, and through him to all of us. That look, this you can go on doing forever, but it's not going to help you when you most need it, and certainly not at the time of death. Now, getting back to who is Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, is it Krishna or is it his teacher, Govindapada? I don't know. He doesn't explain at all in the whole composition. I would speculate it is his teacher that he is referring to. And besides Bhaja Govindam, he has also, of course, many other that we chant here, like the Nirvana Shapkam and so on, which again are very simple language, and which take you from ordinary thought to the highest ideal. And then towering over all of these, the thing that makes him the object of study in throughout the world is his commentaries on the Prasthanatraya, the Gita, the Upanishads, and the Brahma Sutras. They are also amazing, partly because it's not easy to weave a coherent system out of those texts. Why? Because in the first place, let's say Brahma Sutra was actually composed, but the others were compiled at different times. Upanishads, especially, if you go from different Upanishads, you see different styles, different ways of expressing, and from that to weave a coherent system, it's pretty hard to do. So that's a kind of masterful thing that he did. So certainly, we can go on and on now talking about all of Shankara's contributions to Indian spiritual thought, but whatever our view, whether we agree with what he says in certain points or don't agree in other points, it's clear that he's had a major impact on Indian spiritual thought, an amazing individual, and you cannot claim to be a student of Vedanta without familiarizing yourself with a little bit of Shankara's thought. So we certainly need to have more Shankara type of analysis, Shankara type of approach, Shankara type of social concern and activity to establish philosophical aspects for ourselves and for others. Stop there.